Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ideas and Impact. I'm Sophia Pugh, and I'm the District Vice President for Vancouver Island for Scotiabank. It's our pleasure to sponsor this timely edition of Ideas and Impact. Headquartered in Canada, Scotiabank is one of the top 5 financial institutions in the Americas. Our reach is broad, but we are rooted in the communities where we live and work. That's why Scotiabank joined South Island Prosperity Partnership and why we are focused on supporting a strong and diverse economy for this region by working together. This episode of Ideas and Impact focuses on the question every employer is asking: where have all the employees gone? Is this extreme labor shortage the result of COVID, the Great Resignation, or retiring baby boomers? Or are there other factors at play? Today, our panel of industry and labor experts will take a critical look at the causes and impact of the labor shortage on our region and country, and what we need to do to solve the problem across sectors. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for Ideas and Impact, Carrie Slavins, Director of Public Relations and Engagement for South Island Prosperity Partnership.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first rainy day in a very long time, and welcome to September. We wanted to hit the ground running with a very important topic that's been bothering a lot of people. Thank you, Sophia, for your introduction, and also to Scotiabank for sponsoring this session of Ideas and Impact. So when the pandemic began, Canada was slammed with job losses. We were all worried about job losses. Very quickly, however, concerns about the pandemic-related unemployment shifted to focus on another problem: labor shortages. In March 2020, the number of job vacancies in Canada surpassed 1 million for the first time on record. As unemployment hit record lows, the shortages have impacted everything from new home construction to retail and restaurant openings to ferry and flight schedules to access to timely health care. And yes, everybody is asking, where have all the employees gone? Today, I'm pleased to welcome 4 people who are going to look at that question, how we got here and where we're going. So if you could all turn your cameras on, please. First, it's my pleasure to introduce Emilie de Rosenroll. Emilie is CEO of South Island Prosperity Partnership and founding CEO of Coast. And SIP is our region's mandated economic development alliance focused on creating a resilient, innovative, sustainable, and equitable economy for the South Island. Next, I'd like to welcome Dan Gunn, CEO of VIATEC, an organization whose support for our local tech sector has helped turn it into one of the region's largest, the region's largest private industry. Rory Kulmala is CEO of Vancouver Island Construction Association, which focuses on fostering growth, economic stability, and prosperity in the island construction community. And finally, Jeff Bray, Executive Director of the Downtown Victoria Business Association. This association works very hard to support and promote downtown Victoria and the wide variety of business in the region's largest urban core. Thank you all for being here. I want to begin with the question that we all want to know the answer to. Where have all the employees gone? As Sophia said, I mean, people are blaming it on various things. Is it retirement of baby boomers, low birth rates from decades ago? Is it so-called over-generous COVID benefits, long COVID, stalled immigration, reallocation of labor between industries? What is going on? So Emilie, I want to start with you because as head of the region's Economic Development Alliance, you have your eye not just on individual sectors, but also on the big picture and how we fit into Canada and the globe in terms of our economy. So where have all the employees gone, Emilie?
Well, in a nutshell, it's kind of all of the above, Carrie, and we're going to hear a lot of really interesting, I think, anecdotes to support that today on this panel. But we're in the South Island, labor has actually always been a challenge for us, and of course, that's a little bit different sector by sector. But on the whole, the Prosperity Partnership lead private sector members have been citing labor challenges as being really their top concern, top sort of stifling factor, sort of sort of casting a bit of a shadow on production and ability to grow. And that's been for, the last 3 years in a row, 3 years prior to the pandemic beginning. So that's only gotten much worse during the pandemic, of course. And it's something that we're seeing though across Canada. So it's not something special to the South Island. It's something that, prior to the pandemic, now more than half of businesses are actually in Canada are citing it as being a major problem for production ability to expand, which is really a very important indicator. And that is up by like 30 or 40% from prior to the pandemic. So it's definitely getting worse. And if we look at, okay, well, what are the causes of this shortage? A lot of them are structural. A lot of them are stuff that's been going on a lot longer than the pandemic itself. And we've just seen the pandemic kind of exacerbate those problems. And I'll just name a few. You named already a bunch, but the baby boomers started retiring about 10 years ago, and that's just something that's continuing to happen. So we're seeing more of that one day at a time. That big demographic catastrophe that we've been talking about for decades is still just steadily happening one day at a time. So we can't be shocked by the aging, demographics that we're seeing. So that's one piece. But also, there's always a skills mismatch, and that continues to be a problem. We'll probably hear that from Dan, particularly in like the technology area. There's always a need for sort of more skills that require people to upskill and rapidly scale or shift careers or adopt new capabilities in their jobs. So there's kind of always that. But then on top of it, we see the pandemic, we see a surge of mental health, and I'm sure Rory's going to tell us some shocking statistics about that. The pandemic's really put a lot of pressure on people in terms of health, in terms of ability to sort of manage their lives, their families, et cetera. So that really has made an increasing difficulty. And then as things now resurge in certain sectors that took a little longer to rebound, we're seeing that huge demand create more demand for employees. And in turn, we're sort of seeing it more prevalent in all aspects of our lives. Immigration disruptions are another one that's definitely played a role. And I think we're going to see a lot of these ripples kind of unfold over the coming years, really.
Wow. Well, Dan, the VIATEC job board has been seeing record numbers of job postings over the last couple, I don't know, I've noticed it certainly over the last year. What is your analysis of what's happening with the labor supply in the tech sector? How severe is the shortage, and what do we do?
Well, there's a lot to that question. I think the first thing is at least 15 years in a row, our members have told us that the rate determining step for growth is talent. And so we, like any region that has a thriving tech sector, has been slowed by access to good, skilled, experienced talent. What the pandemic and all the other elements have done is compounded that issue. And so right now, actually, we're seeing our companies are looking further abroad than ever before because remote work is more of an option. And I think if we talk about the microeconomics of our own region, that is something we need to pay attention to, because right now, tech companies are bringing in $4 to $5 billion a year in annual revenues. We'll have a new economic impact study soon, but those numbers are from 2018, which is great for the economy because most of those dollars come from outside the region and they get paid out in salaries, which becomes a great tax base and becomes a great contribution to all the restaurants, cafes, festivals, and other things that we have locally. But if those companies have to find their talent somewhere else in the globe, then we're going to lose some of that positive ripple effect that comes from that. And so right now on our job board, we're, going into the summer, things always slow down. Coming out of the fall, I would say we're a little bit behind where we would expect to be with job postings locally. And I think the reason for that is because they're starting to look a lot further abroad, and it's become that much more difficult. And so the way you look for talent has become much more curated than posting on a job board. You have to work very hard to find people and bring them in. And so, the challenge for us economically, I think that is twofold. There's the potential of the lost impact if we're hiring people from outside the region, and there's the fact that our companies can't grow as fast as their potential because they can't find those people. And so that's real, and it's not unique to Victoria, but Victoria can outcompete and outperform other places because we're small and agile. And so if we can get smart about it, we can get ahead.
Right. Okay. I guess we've heard about how are things, Dan? You know, you were talking about people working more remotely, but in terms of attracting workers here, how big an impact or influence is the housing shortage, for instance, cost of living here? Is that factoring into it at all?
Sure it is. I think the number one challenge to talent for our sector is related to housing availability and housing affordability. There have been, I hear about it almost daily from companies that, you know, they can list half a dozen to many dozens of job offers that at the end didn't follow through because the person couldn't find a place to live, whether or not that was affordability or availability. And so that is if that gets addressed, then that will go a long way to solving the issue. It's not the only thing, but it's something that we can do something about. And you know, we're not making more South Island. You know, it's we're stuck with the amount of real estate that we have, and so we have to get smart about density. We have to get smart about alternative housing options with basement suites and garden suites and all of those things. And we have to do it really fast. You know, we're doing it too slowly.
And that is the thing that's mentioned over and over, is that we're not moving fast enough. And interestingly enough, a number of people have commented that we did seem to be able to move fast when we had to during the pandemic, but are we returning to older ways of doing things when we needed to keep our foot on the pedal? Rory, according to StatsCan, construction is one of the sectors hardest hit by this labor shortage, and a report by BuildForce Canada found a worker shortfall. Workers are not keeping pace with demand. What are your insights about your sector? What's going on there?
Well, I think as Emilie has talked about, we've been tracking this for 10 years. We knew this was primarily coming from the retirement bubble that really is starting in 2020. So some of the numbers that I've been looking and tracking, you know, nationally, we employ about $1.2 million in the construction sector. That's projected to go up to about from 1.2 to 1.22. You know, it's going to go up about 20,000. Provincially, we see that same effect happening, where, you know, we employ nearly 195,000 people in this sector. It's going to go up 5,000 or 6,000 people. That's going to manifest itself through replacing the retirements, and the retirements are profound. You know, in BC, we're going to be seeing nearly 25,000 people retire from the 2021 to 2024-25 season year. And you layer on, we still need another 3,000 to 4,000 workers on top of that. We're going to have a shortfall of nearly 7 to 10, you know, probably 7, I'd argue it probably closer to 10,000 workers, depending on where we are, whether you're Vancouver Island, some of the northern projects that are happening. So we really start to see this happening, not because of COVID. The COVID is really, I think the COVID is really impacting the inertia by which we're getting back to things. And I think, as we all knew, we saw that businesses were shut down, and certainly the construction sector, I have to say, fared well in a sense that we were deemed an essential service. But it also, we start to feel the pinch where costs have escalated at a rate we've never seen before. We've seen the impact of everything from fuel to materials and, of course, labor really be impacted by what has been seen as, I think, COVID really driving a lot of these questions. And where are we going with our economy? Well, we're going up in our costs. That's translating itself into our construction sector. So, you know, we're struggling with it. We've known about it. We're in an era of construction that we've never seen before. And the other challenge to this, it's right across Canada. So where Victoria or BC would compete with Alberta, remember, a couple of years ago, Alberta got a bit soft, we took their workers. We've seen workers from right across Canada come to BC to work on some of our mega projects. But because those regional economies are also so strong and are also in demand, those workers aren't being as mobile. Talk about what Dan talks about, the cost of housing. We attract workers from Alberta, but somebody coming from Red Deer, Alberta, with a 3,000 square foot home on an acre property, looking at Victoria going, nope, I'm not going to do it. I can work here and I can do just as well. So we're competing with that paradigm that's happening right across the country.
I just want to pop in. We had a question here, and usually I'll wait to the end, but this seems relevant now. Do you see the current housing slowdown affecting the number of workers needed? Can you comment on that question? And
Well, I don't right now. We don't have a slowdown. The reality is we have pent up demand that is not getting built because we don't have the workers, or there are questions around affordability, particularly with materials and the escalation costs. Primarily, what I hear from our members is they're looking at a book of projects, and they're like, I can't do it because I don't have the workers. I can't even bid that work. So, we're kind of caught between a chicken and an egg, where we know our population on the island is growing. We know we have a demand for housing that is not going to recede anytime soon. And the other part of this is, of the workforce I talked about, approximately 50% of them work in the residential market. They are our residential builders. They're, everybody we see, the 4 or 5 people on a team building homes. That adds up, and it's really driving when we look at the number of building permits that are issued, that are housing permits. CMHC in itself is saying there is going to be a slight slowdown in construction. That's on a general basis. If we look at Vancouver Island, I'd argue that our trends are not showing that. Our trends are showing that for BC, or for Victoria and the regional Victoria area, the building permits are high. If you look at all of the projects that are in the planning stages, they're not even going to come close to what we need to do to I don't want to say saturate our market, but provide enough housing so that we can start to stabilize our housing market. I think we're away from that. We've got too much work to do to build to make sure we get there.
Okay, very interesting. So when people talk about this slowdown, that's really not accurate.
No, I think they're talking about fewer projects, but the reality is now you have investors and developers and contractors going, maybe I should wait a bit, or I don't have the labor to do that. So are we slowing down because people are buying less? Well, there is that, because we know the cost of housing is super expensive. But again, what does that look like in 2 or 3 years when the supply is starting to balance demand?
Exactly. Okay, well, thanks, Rory. And we'll come back to this in a little bit and explore more of sort of the issues and solutions. Jeff, you are right downtown, and restaurants, hospitality, major draws for you, retail, but many businesses have been forced to reduce hours due to the labor shortage. Some have closed. What are you hearing from downtown business owners about the labor shortage? What's going on and how are they coping?
Sure. And like the other presenters have mentioned, this was a trend that was happening before COVID. We were, at one point, we were sub 4% unemployment rate. We were truly nominal unemployment rate. And, that is no more reflected than in some of your hourly jobs, retail, food and beverage, hospitality, seasonal jobs. So it's been a struggle for a long time. What the pandemic did, of course, was create a huge amount of uncertainty in a lot of those sectors where the employment is a little bit less stable. If you're, in this town, if you're a government worker, you might have changed where you were working, but you were still working. But if you were on a banquet team at a hotel, you were not working. So what we saw with the pandemic was a number of people having to make very drastic life choices because their employment was gone and with no certainty as to when it was going to come back. So we saw in the hotel sector, people moving from hotels to, the long-term care sector, both in kitchens and in house cleaning. We saw others in the culinary world go work in logging camps and mining camps, 2 weeks on, 1 week off, because they had certainty around their employment, and quite frankly made good money and weren't working till 3 a.m. So we lost a number of those individuals to different sectors. Another part was people said, gee whiz, I don't want to be caught in this again. So they started to pursue micro-credentialing and started to upscale their skills and move into, Dan's world. Or we saw some people go into Rory's world and said, well, I make $18.50 an hour at Starbucks, but I can make $25 an hour working on a job site. So we saw a shift. I think post-pandemic, what we're seeing is the same things that especially for any of your entry-level work was cost of housing or availability, cost of transportation, and cost and availability of childcare. which were all real inhibitors in this region in particular. I think a couple of the other things that we're seeing now in terms of where all the employees are going is, remember pre-pandemic, if you had the sniffles, you came into work. Now you're off for 5 days. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we are seeing absenteeism because people have been so worried about coming into office sick that if you've got an operation that needs 6 people absolutely to open your door and 2 call in sick, you're not opening because you don't have extra staff. I think we are seeing, quite frankly, some, and no one's really talking about it openly, but attitude changes. You know, quite frankly, the number of my businesses that have said, you know what, I had an interview with 10 people and 5 didn't even show up, just plain didn't show up. Or I had someone, you know, ready to start a shift and they came for one shift and then they just never came back. And so, you know, those are types of things we didn't see. You wouldn't ghost a job or ghost an interview, you at least send an email. So we're seeing that there's some attitude changes in terms of, you know, how people feel about, you know, the fact that I've got 3 or 4 opportunities. So the certainty for employers has changed, again, especially in the hospitality and the service sector, where people just come and go. No question, for a lot of our businesses, the immigration backlog, not just the slowdown, but the immigration backlog, especially for the designated worker program, where some of the expedited codes haven't been changed to meet the needs and things like hospitality. Has been a real challenge. That's where a lot of our members can draw, especially seasonal workers. Hasn't happened. So, you know, for retail, for food and beverage, for hospitality, it's been a number of those types of things. And finally, we're starting to see the tension between, you know, cost of living, wages to deal with inflation, but then, you know, all the upward compression that creates within an organization. And then there's the inflation expectation. In other words, well, I need to make more money because I'm worried that 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we're going to have inflation. And that is making people make different choices as to where they think they might want to work or live, even though some of the forecasters are suggesting inflation will be dropping back down to, you know, 1 to 3% within, you know, another year or two. So we're seeing a lot of these types of things impact, and it's stabilized a little bit, but it certainly was, for the pandemic, a really unstable time when you rely on, you know, 60% of your employees being part-time, and they can go anywhere.
Exactly.
Carrie, if I might, you know, I think Jeff raises a good point when he talks about the different sectors. And one of the things that, you know, a lot of the conversations I have with members who are trying to find people, notwithstanding the challenges of showing up for an interview and then coming back for the second day of work. But, you know, some of the realities are we have a buffet of work opportunity to choose from. You know, 50 years, 60 or 100 years ago, you were in manufacturing, you were in farming, or you were in, you know, the parent's business, whatever that might be. If you think of how expanded our economy has been, where, you know, I'm competing with the same folks that Dan is looking for. You know, our sector is looking for all of the people, and we're all eager to serve our industries. And what that means is we're all, you know, there's very few people to pick from when you think about it. You know, there's 100 jobs for 50 people. And now it's becoming what's attractive. We didn't talk about remote workers. We've had a few people that says, I don't want to work because I want to work from home. Well, in construction, we can't do that. You got to show up at the site. We talk about flexibility. You know, we have a team approach to construction. You've got to have people on site. It has a process, no different than, you know, healthcare workers or anybody else that's in the sector. So when we're looking at it, we're trying to think of, and we're all doing this, I'm sure, is what makes our sector the one that we want to, you know, the one that wants to make you come and work for us.
Exactly.
And we're putting out a lot of effort to do that.
Mhm. And of course, you know, this rapid sort of digital, I don't want to call it a revolution, but it's certainly been the focus on digital and having to make that move across sectors. I mean, as you say, Rory, construction. I mean, well, you need a lot of people to run a lot of technology in construction as well. So this has really impacted us. Dan, do you want to comment on this sort of surge that people are talking about? In technology and the effect on the labor force?
Sure. I think what's happened is there's been a variety of impacts on all of these industries and sectors, but there's an asynchronous impact in that tech companies generally are quite agile and they transfer quickly, and so the digital opportunities are more quickly adopted and taken advantage of. Whereas let's pick on government, because we've already talked about slow changes for housing. Other parts of the economy don't move at that same speed, so that could create a greater distance or appearance of distance. I don't know how anomalous this is, long term. In a lot of ways, the last year has felt a great deal like 2007. In 2007, the economy was overheating. Our unemployment was at a record low. People were the churn in our industry in particular was very high, and so if you get a high churn like we're seeing in all of our industries now, you can expect maybe a 25% increase in your costs related to attraction, retention, training, all of those things. I saw a question there about employer of choice. And so when you're competing, you're starting to give better benefits, you're starting to give more flexibility, you're starting to give more perks. All of that adds to the cost and the bottom line. 2008, we may all remember that the Americans took the global economy down with the subprime mortgage, and things sort of level set and corrected. And I think we're about 8 years overdue for our next recession. And so what we're seeing with inflationary pressures and other things currently and the reaction, maybe that economic cooling will allow all other industries to adapt as well. But generally what happens when there's stress and strain, whether or not that's us quickly reacting with government programs that were really helpful during the pandemic or reacting to industry opportunity. Digital is often a part of the solution because it's ones and zeros. It's at the speed of light. It's easy to pick. It's easy to build, easy-ish to build, depending on what it is. And it's pretty much cost-free to ship. And so when there's stress and strain, that's going to have a big advantage. However, you need the housing, you need the hospitality and the quality of life items that make it a desirable place to be. And so fortunately, I think overall Victoria is still one of the more desirable places in the world to be, and that advantage should continue. It's now how do we grow our communities at the speed we need to keep up with our growth potential and not get cost of living out of whack with the rest of the country.
Okay. And just while I'm thinking of that shift, Emilie, of course, you are also not just CEO of SIP, but you're the founding CEO of Coast, which is looking to grow the blue economy here on the Pacific Coast, the sustainable blue economy. That brings to mind jobs in sustainable industries, mitigating climate change, clean tech and whatnot. That opens up a whole other area where we urgently need skilled people. And we're competing. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Excuse me. Well, I think that, where there's a lot of industries, and we've talked about that a lot through the pandemic, that there's that sort of ideal around, as we reinvest in skills and education, which we always have to do during recessions, generally speaking, but certainly need to do in a pandemic, which is just like turning the world upside down. There's always this labor market readjustment that occurs. So it's very important, and it's also an important opportunity to create those sort of pushes in the direction that you want to take your economy. So clean, sustainable jobs, ocean impact, whether it's in that side or on clean energy or any other aspect of a sort of more sustainable, regenerative, or circular economy. Those are all really key. But also there's a question from the audience around sort of in being more inclusive about how we build back. So Jeff Bray also brought up sort of upskilling, reskilling. I mean, that's why we got involved with MicroStart programming, sort of looking at how do we pool micro credentials and allow people to sort of more rapidly upskill and reskill, something we did with Royal Roads and UVic. But if I can pick up on I was kind of like there's so many things that the panelists were bringing up that I wanted to talk about, but just going back to that sort of just general, the general sort of difficulty that we're all facing in the workforce, I think is, largely the economists called it a while back, like the shortage economy. And so I think it's also a mental shift for businesses across all sectors and for people that we actually are not dealing. Before it was sort of an embarrassment of riches, and to some extent it was, we as employers could have our pick of employees, and the sort of power was tilted perhaps towards the employer, and that's just not the case anymore. And quite frankly, the bottom line is that our labor pool is smaller. It has literally shrunk. So, you'll feel the differences in different sectors, but just generally speaking, it's smaller. So of course, that means we have to be more competitive. Of course, that means we have to dig harder to try to access, areas where we're underutilizing the skill set, for example, of immigrants. We're not integrating them well enough. So there's all kinds of things that we need to be doing to be able to sort of compete and help kind of do the most with what we have, with the labor force we have. The other thing to think about and talk about, it's been for a long time, the sort of the boogeyman is talking about automation, because we all fear, robots will take over our job. But there's obviously a deep need to have some automation and some productivity improvements. So essentially, how do we all just do more with less? And so we all need to incorporate those sort of things in our life that kind of own us a little bit, but those sort of aspects that create efficiencies and sort of reduce the workload on people. But of course, making sure that people are being valued for their highest use, their highest talent that they can do to contribute, which so that will never be replaced by automation.
No, that's great. Does anybody else want to comment on the automation topic?
Well, I mean, I'll jump in on, we saw that come to fruition big time for a lot of businesses that traditionally, never used anything more complicated than a calculator or a cash register in retail, restaurants, when we saw a lot of people recognizing that the only way they could maintain operations and move inventory was using this thing. And we saw that with the great explosion of Uber Eats, DoorDash, for a brief period of time, Tootie. And all of a sudden, restaurants had to shift how they did their back of house operation, and then how they did the actual food delivery. We saw that in retail. And I know Dan and the tech sector in this community, right at the beginning of the pandemic, offered up some opportunities for small businesses to actually have an online presence. Mm-hmm. But again, that meant they had to do things a little bit differently with respect to how the customer picked up their product. We curbside pickup. What was that? So we did see a lot of use of that. What is interesting is now that we're sort of, I don't want to say post-pandemic, but we're back to pre-pandemic levels in a lot of our economic activity. Those lifelines have now become pinch points in a lot of businesses. If you go to a Starbucks and they're running like banshees back there because they've still got the lineup of people who want their latte, but now they got all the people who have pre-ordered coming in. So the fact is that the way in which businesses, even small businesses, are interacting digitally and with technology is continuing, but it hasn't necessarily been the panacea now that we're back to normal operations. And it's creating staff challenges at the production side of things. You don't need as many people to clean tables, but you need way more people to make your lattes. So I think we're seeing that. I think certainly in the office environment, things like Zoom, Microsoft Teams is the new norm. I think in Victoria, unlike some other urban centers in North America, are going to see a greater return to the office for a whole host of reasons. But nonetheless, the office of the future is going to look different. And part of it is the adoption of technology, both by the employer and by employees, and to a large extent, customers. There's lots of customers who've never met their financial planner in person now.
Right.
And they're quite fine with that. So I think we're going to see a lot of that technology, not so much automation on the service side, but certainly that interface of technology and how customers get their service is going to be different.
No, for sure. I want to circle back here. Emilie, I want to talk about inflation. It's on everybody's mind. And let's look at that in terms of the labor shortage and just delve a little bit deeper into what's happening there.
Yeah, well, that is on everyone's mind. I think in the US, it's like the election, sort of issue, this sort of the top issue. And it's people are talking about it in all aspects, meatflation and eggflation and all of these different sort of versions on inflation. So it's definitely in kind of like every aisle, and people are seeing that. But there is a strong connection between the worker sort of shortage and inflation that sort of reinforces itself. And so as Jeff just described, this kind of resurgence of like a classic demand, like a normal, what we call sort of pre-pandemic demand, that's kind of clashing with the sort of maybe new market opportunities that we created. So we're seeing that sort of big increased pressure on services and goods. And then as a result, employers need to find more employees to cover that. And in trying to do that, meanwhile, the employees are facing higher costs everywhere, as the businesses are, and they're asking for higher wages. And so as they do that, the prices go up, and then it continues this vicious cycle. So that's why, I mean, the central banks are so terrified about inflation just being something that just literally gets worse and worse and worse, and then add in the sort of optics or the perception, again, something that Jeff brought up is that sort of perspective that inflation is just going to keep going for years and years and years. And then you add in like almost like a speculation around inflation, which I read an article yesterday called, like, they're calling that now vibeflation, because it's like an emotional thing that is creating an actual inflationary pressure. So you can see how like this inflation is actually runaway inflation is like the worst thing that could happen in so many respects. So if we don't stop that and halt that, then everything gets 10,000 times worse. So I think that's why it's important that the interest rates are going so high, which is obviously creating some pain. And I believe in 2023, sort of early part of 2023, most of the banks are forecasting a sort of mild recession. And really, that is actually, seems counterintuitive, but that is great news for all of us, because that will actually reduce that pressure on the workers and give everybody a bit more breathing room to readjust supply and demand.
I think that's, yeah. And I just read that RBC was talking about that recession in, possibly 2023 might ease labor shortages. The one thing that they were talking about is that as Canada's population continues to age, these problems are going to continue to return. So we have to deal with it. And in fact, there was Armine Yelnizkan, an economist and Atkinson Fellow on the Future of Workers, says the labor shortage was predictable 60 to 65 years ago, and we've done nothing about it. So will we just continue to do nothing and just hope it goes away? Is that just the human way of doing things, or what's happening? I mean, we've got to look at the retiring baby boomers.
Well, I think that's part of the federal government strategy. Of course, they've announced again another increase in the annual immigration target rate. And that really is in large measure labor pool replacement. That's the federal government's response. The challenge that we have is, first of all, there's about 1.5 million applications for permanent residence in the backlog. When the minister says we're going to bring 435,000 people into Canada this year, to Rory's point, where are you going to house them? Yeah. We are looking over the next 2 decades. I was just at a presentation yesterday. We're looking at net, that's taking into demolishments, everything else, net 3,000 new housing units every year for the next 20 years to even begin to meet the demand. And that's a moderate, that's a median projection between some more aggressive population growth and what the CRD is planning through the regional growth strategy. But, we're not building anywhere near that. And again, that's just of all types. The fact is that for a lot of our sectors, especially if we're looking to get new Canadians or younger Canadians here, they're not looking to buy in Broadmead when they get here. You know, they and a roommate need a rental apartment somewhere. I think the challenge that we're going to have with immigration, even though we are getting more than our annual share, we're starting to see more of that, is new purpose-built rental projects. The performers are all out the window now. And I think the challenge is going to be, it's not going to make economic sense for anybody to build purpose-built rental, which means you're back to building a strata development residentially for investment. But who's going to buy a condo when your costs are unregulated, but your revenue is regulated? So that's going to be our big challenge. I think there'll be lots of things that middle income, higher end professionals are going to be able to afford, but the workers that we're going to need and that Canada is aiming to bring in are going to find it increasingly difficult to live in the capital region, or for that matter, in places like the Cowichan Valley, because they're not building fast enough. So I think really immigration in the short and midterm is our way. The longer term is what Emilie's talking about, which is shifting some of how we work so that we have the highest and best skill and people trained to that highest level, and things like automation and technology deal with some of the more mundane stuff. And the quick example I'll give is years ago, I toured some lumber mills in the interior, and one was the new Canfor mill in Houston. And I mean, it was all automated. You still had lots of workers, but boy, it just moved things through computers. It could look at a log in 1 second, determine the most efficient use of that one log and send it to the right cutters. I went to another one, and there was a guy at the end of the line stamping the company's logo on the boards. So I think that's going to be the other challenge is that we're going to have to find ways to work smarter, because I don't think we're going to find, that equilibrium between job opportunities and job growth in this area and employees, stable employees. And so I think we're going to see both of those things, but without housing, it's a moot point. There's literally nowhere for people. The other thing I'll just quickly say is the conversation that I've been hearing is students going to UVic, going to Camosun in particular, 6 of them sleeping on the floor of one person's apartment because they can't find anywhere to live. Yep. Well, again, if you can't find anywhere to live, you're not going to be coming here to get the skills to then potentially be a future employee here. So housing, I really think, is going to be one of the keys.
So, and finding a doctor, just to throw in that on housing, right? Because, there was that doctor in the interior maybe 3 months ago or something who went to the press and said we can't stop building more houses in the middle of a housing crisis, stop building more houses because we can't provide healthcare, primary care to the people that would move in. So, again, it's like thinking about that shortage economy. It's as much healthcare as housing.
Very good point. I mean, and I can't remember when I've heard, medical care talked about, in line with the economy so much. And we're just seeing a flood of that. I just want to, I'm just going to weave in some questions from the audience as we go on. We've got one here about the comment about attitude change related to job seekers and employees. And this person says, how are industries responding in a changing culture to become an employer of choice? So I want to look at that and go, what are employers doing? Are they doing everything they can? Or are there things that each of you in your areas are hearing about that might benefit employees, different ideas, employers, different ideas for them? To help
for the construction sector, again, we're so desperate, we're desperate to find qualified, skilled people, both to come into the sector and stay in the sector. A lot of the companies now are focusing on mental wellness. So as we were, we've been promoting wellness around the opioid tragedies that have been happening, because we know that 1 in 5 are coming from our sector. Those are profound numbers, and companies now have to look at their workforce in a different way as just being, labor and getting work done to find health and benefits, to find good wages. And, I'd argue that construction has very good wages. They're becoming very accommodating. So some of the elements that, what we're trying to do in the sector is, integrating newcomers. We're putting out a number of programs, both for potential employees, but also companies to understand how can they work with respecting the cultural needs of an immigrant, of, their lifestyle needs. We're also looking at how do we create a better culture overall, whether it's, construction can be a bit of a crude work environment. How do we temper that? How do we get behaviors that make it welcoming for women, for others, other individuals that don't feel comfortable on the site. So, I think we all have an obligation to promote our sectors as a positive work environment. Look at professional development. I was going to talk a little bit about technology and innovation, and construction's ripe for it. So companies now investing in their people to upskill so that they can learn how to use technology in the day-to-day activities that go on with construction. And we have a huge gap, or we have a huge bridge of talent. We have 55, 60-year-olds who are not technically savvy to young people coming in that are extremely technical savvy. And that middle ground of integrating has to network all of that culture together so that, we can keep going. And I think when we're looking at how do we look at wages, there's a cap. We have companies that they get a job, they're paying a little more, and they're pulling people around, but there's a cap. There's only, you're not going to get too much higher than what, there's a regional economy, and it's only going to pay so much. Right. So you have to supplement it with other things, family events, looking at, how they can, work around people's lifestyles. A lot of that's being accommodated, certainly in the construction sector, in an effort to both attract and retain employees.
Okay.
And I think there's some other things that are happening too, in addition to what Rory's talked about, that is making that challenging. One of the things, and again, I've said that Victoria may see less of this sort of true hybrid or even working from home model. I think people all said, what a great panacea, I could work from home. And but what happens over time is you realize it's not a lot of fun sitting at your kitchen nook every day, 5 days a week, and you miss that camaraderie. So I think what I'm seeing from some of the sort of, more office side of things is really making the office a fun place. Like, it's a fun place to be. It's social. There's mentorship. That if you're in the office, you can get more sort of on-site training, and that idea of making the workplace a fun place, both to get people back into the office, but also as a retention strategy for things like retail hospitality. Again, it is that flexibility, but you can only be so flexible, and perks, and so opportunities to participate in the service you provide more regularly. So if you're if you're in a retail setting, you get a really good discount for whatever you're selling, and these types of things. But at the end of the day, it is about making sure that people feel valued when they're on the job site, that they have opportunity on the job site, that they're compensated well, and that they like being there, that this is a place that I want to be. And that, again, is a change from when you had your pick of the litter. Right. To and so managers have to be much better, at 1 minute managing, and owners have to be much more sensitive to where their employees are at on issues like mental health. You can't just say suck it up anymore.
No, you can't.
So I know that issues around well-being and mental health have become much more of a focus, even of very small employers who were always great employers, always a great sense of family, but now they're realizing they need some additional tools to be able to support employees that are dealing with any number of issues that before were just told you got to suck it up. So I think there's a shift on the job site to make this a fun place for people to be. And that's the way they're going to retain some of their workers, where that wasn't a consideration 7 or 8 years ago.
And it's about, connecting people to the labor force, you know, which is another reason that we want people to come back into the offices. Dan, I'm kind of curious from your point of view in your sector, what's being done? What are employers doing to make themselves more attractive? You talked about remote work opportunities. What's happening and what still needs to happen?
So I would think that, it's pretty obvious that being an employer of choice has been a terminology in the tech sector for 2 decades. But that can lead to unused foosball tables and mediocre sandwich bars as well, right? And so I think sometimes that the perks become just that, they're veneer. And I think how this has gotten deeper as a result of our current situation is employers are starting to recognize that the character of the organization, the purpose of the organization, the values and the vision of that organization, how that resonates with their employees is a lot more important than it used to be. And it can be a great way to create loyalty and a long-term relationship with somebody. Keep in mind too, we've talked about immigration and remote work. And I would say that when I have this conversation several times a day. I'm going to a leadership retreat we're hosting next week with 30 CEOs, and it's going to be a big conversation. Depending on who I talk to, what they think is happening is a reflection of what they want to be happening. So some people tell me remote's going to work for everybody, and maybe that works for their market, for their customer, for their type of productivity. And other people are like, no, we have to be together. If we're not together, we're not going to have the culture that we need to be successful and innovative. And what I've learned is it's more a projection than a prediction. But what's different, I think that and unexpected is because remote opportunities became more widely adopted and available. I don't think any region in the world was prepared for the competition that they were going to be in for their top talent. So if you have a really experienced, great, let's pick engineer because that's a general enough thing. They will get offered a job unsolicited from San Francisco that pays 50% to 100% more than they're making in Canada. They're going to take that. And so now the companies locally, where do they find their great innovators and their skills? And so the competition is no longer just with the company in a city nearby or within your own city. It's with everywhere. And it's going to take some time to wash out. I thought at the beginning that working remotely was the greatest thing ever. I'm Generation X. I'm my only child. And so being in isolation and not having to do extroverted things sounded great. And after about 8 months, I realized I actually need to be around people. And so now I'm in the office every single day. But there are some people that it works for them. And so I don't think there's one brush for everyone. I think that some people are going to work remotely and they're going to be very productive, and some companies are going to be 100% remote and some are going to be hybrid. And they're going to attract the people that are attracted to that form of work.
Right. And Emilie, I kind of want you to weigh in here. And one of the things you've also been involved with is surveying employers through SIP to find out where their pain points were. What are you hearing? What are you thinking that we have to do to encourage people to reconnect with the workforce and also just to get more people in here?
Yeah, I mean, it's another kind of broad question, but weighing in on the remote work piece, like I agree completely with what Dan's saying, and we're seeing the same thing. So the different, sectors are a little bit different. They all have their sort of, their sort of norms and culture and needs and so on and requirements. So they tend to be a little bit different, but in the ones where you can work from home, there's definitely a lot of disagreement around sort of how much at home time is good, and sort of what does a hybrid work environment look like. We're reading things about employers tending to be like the managers tending to be the ones that see more of the importance and maybe the benefit of working in person. And so, and I've read some pieces on that, whether or not that's because they tend to have maybe the better office, the more, positive experience of the office situation, and also just the bias of that's how they sort of made their way up in the world. And so it's just kind of, how do you sort of break open things that might be bigger, sort of harder to unpack, and are people getting the promotional opportunities when they're working remote? So what's kind of all of those knock-on effects. So I think we're definitely still kind of working that out, but again, it's a buyer's, I think the sort of case in point around all of this is it's a seller's market for skills. So if employers aren't listening and each culture is different, but if you're not listening, if you're not asking your employees sort of how they want to work and what is working for them best, and listening to their needs and trying to reflect those back in the workplace, then you're going to see that you're kind of with the short end of the stick.
And Emilie, just to continue, because we are coming to the end here, what are we missing in this picture? What haven't we talked about today? And I know this is a massive issue, but if you wanted to weigh in with some final thoughts on this,
well, I hope
for you.
I'd love everyone to weigh in with their final thoughts on this, but my sort of final thoughts are that these are issues that are really big, and sometimes seem kind of hard to control, and they're things that Japan is experiencing even actually worse than us, and so they're kind of global, a lot of these things. So that can feel sort of intimidating, but at the same time, I think the panelists did a really great job at listing out some really practical solutions and how this is actually playing out in the South Island and what we can do. So housing is a big one. We have levers there. We can do something. We need to do it way, way, way faster. I completely agree. There's other pieces like healthcare. There's things we can do there. We have channels. So there's, childcare, there's better supports for immigration, there's education. So there's a lot of tools that we have, and burying our heads in the sand when we look at these labor shortages and then just wait for it to really, really hurt and then go back to pretending it's all fine, as we've done for decades, is not a recipe for success.
Right. Rory, last comments?
I think the one thing I would have liked to talk, and I'll just put out there, is I think we have to invest in our children and our youth when they're younger. Certainly for our sector, getting kids to pursue vocation or the trades is something that kids at a very young age either get onto it or they don't. They become academic or they don't. It doesn't mean they can't bridge between the two, but I'm seeing far too much of our the middle school and the high school levels ignoring all of these other types of training and development that could allow a child to become a carpenter or a welder or a brain surgeon. It doesn't, I'm not trying to say either one, but there's very little focus on vocational mentorship as opposed to academic mentorship. And, the kids that are coming out now are really lacking any capacity past grade 12 to really know where they're going to go. Particularly when you see school systems eliminating shop class in grade, middle school. So, we've got to keep these kids interested and motivate them to say, here's a career path for me. I might not be the strongest academically, but I've got these great skills with my hands, and my, my applied abilities are there. So I think we have to keep that in mind as a systems approach to look at. It's a whole bunch of things, but we also can't forget our kids.
No, and I think that's a really good point. Dan?
I think how I'd like to frame this is that, we're talking about a lot of macro things that are not unique to Victoria. And so the opportunity for us, and, when we talked about agility and we talked about when Jeff was giving examples of digital adoption during the pandemic, if you're an innovative entrepreneur, challenges and problems are opportunities. And so we have an opportunity here to try and be better prepared and more agile and more creative in our solutions. And so this isn't going away, a recession or not. We've been dealing with this for a while. And so how can Victoria preserve what makes so many people want to be here while making room for more people to be here? That's the critical linchpin that I see. But that's something that's actually within our control.
Okay, and actually that's a great way to frame it. That's a bit of a hope and a note of hope in a very big topic that sometimes seems very unmanageable for people, looking to the local. And Jeff, you get the final word.
Wow, what a shock. Well, I would say, to the extent to which we can diversify who we're competing for, that's one of our great opportunities. So things like Coast and really focusing in a new area is one of the ways that we deal with the labor challenge, because we're not necessarily all chasing the same employee. We actually have more opportunities. But I would say the top three things that we are going to need to do, because we've recaptured 105% of the jobs that we had pre-pandemic. In other words, we have more jobs now than we did before. And the population of retirees versus jobs is going to continue to grow. and the population is going to continue to grow ahead of the housing curve. So I would say the top 3 things that we can ultimately do to really be able to attract and retain workers is number 1 is housing, number 2 is housing, and then the third one is housing. I just think that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how great an employer you are, if I literally can't live in the CRD, it's moot. We need tens of thousands of additional new units over the next 20 years. And that rests either with our municipalities who control land use, or as our potentially incoming premier suggests, it may fall back to the province. And I think we want municipalities to control it, but they've got to recognize that every municipality is going to look a lot different 20 years from now. It's about getting on with the job.
Okay, very, very good. And so this is fascinating. I think we could have like 4 more sessions of this. I want to thank all of you, Rory Kulmala of VICA, Dan Gunn, VIATEC, Emilie de Rosenroll of SIP, and Jeff Bray, DVBA. Those are a lot of acronyms, but some very smart people who are really in touch with what's happening in their sectors and with the labor shortage overall. You've given us some clarity onto this very important issue, and a big thank you to our sponsor today, Sophia, thank you, and thank you, Scotiabank. If you would like to watch this panel again or share it with others, we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel. And speaking of gaining clarity, SIP's 3rd annual Rising Economy Conference is coming up from November 15th to 17th. We're going to be looking at how to cut through the noise, gain clarity, really try and tackle some of the big issues and have deep conversations around our future. And you can visit ourrisingeconomy.com and sign up for the newsletter and be the first to hear about exciting keynotes and ticket sales. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to our audience. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.